Hello and welcome to Lesson 2 in our course, Basics of Biblical Archaeology. In this lesson, we're going to talk about the apologetic value of biblical archaeology. In other words, what use does it have to be able to defend the Bible? Because apologetics is the defense of something. And oftentimes, critics are going to look at the Bible and try to find flaws and mistakes. And especially, they're going to go after what they consider to be historical issues, that something in the Bible is not correct in what it records related to ancient history. So the field of biblical archaeology allows us, though, to look carefully at what was found in the ground, what's to be read on ancient documents and inscriptions. And through a careful study of all of this, we are able to demonstrate how the Bible is, as much as can be so, exonerated or proven to be factually historical in the area of history. So, let's start with a definition for biblical archaeology, and here it is. Archaeology is the scientific discipline that's concerned with the material remains of mankind's past, consisting of both the discovery and reclamation of such remains, as well as the art of its subsequent interpretation for recreating the events and living environments that existed in ancient times. So, first of all, biblical archaeology is a science. Now, it's not considered to be a hard science, but it's considered to be a soft science. What is the difference? Well, with a hard science, you're talking about recurring events that can be tested over and over again. For example, the area of a circle is always going to be equal to pi times the radius squared. A equals PR squared. And that will never change. No matter what circle it is, how big it is, how small it is, it will always be consistent. Now, with the, for example, Einstein's theory of relativity, E equals mc squared, energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. That's always going to be true no matter what. You can test the speed of light today, tomorrow, a week from now. You can test it from this side of the earth. You can test it from the other side of the earth. It doesn't matter. It will always be the same. So that's something that's beneficial to the area of hard sciences. They constantly have checks and balances that can be made by formulas they find that are perpetually true. But with sciences like archaeology, there's a lot of interpretation that's involved. So that makes it much more challenging. But it's still considered a science. So it's discovering and reclaiming remains, and it's the art of interpreting them for recreating the events that took place at certain times in history. So what that means is that we're able to look at the physical remains, having dug them up. We can look at them, study them, understand them. In some ways, the study of them includes very hard science-related scientific studies, such as the radiocarbon level that's within, if it's organic material, and if it's a stone or a piece of soil, measuring or checking the components within it to be able to determine through scientific means where the stone or where the soil material came from. All of that is a hard science part of it. But there's a lot of interpretation involved, because at the end of the day, the stones don't speak, the pottery doesn't speak, the tools and weapons don't speak, the monumental architecture doesn't speak. We have to understand the significance of all of the things that we do find. So there's a lot of art that's involved. It's both science and art at the same time. The same is true, really, of the interpretation of the Bible, hermeneutics, interpreting it correctly. You can't really just pull out a manual and know exactly how any certain portion of the Bible is to be interpreted. You have to be able to study very carefully what are all the issues and have the art of being able to interpret them. And that, again, the same is true with archaeology. We need to have a great understanding of the material to be able to sift through it and and kind of focus on the areas that aren't just hard and fast true, but that have to be interpreted. But biblical archaeology overlaps with the field of archaeology only a fraction of the time, and it's the study of the archaeological matters related to the characters, sites, and material object described in or related to anything pertaining to the Bible. So with biblical archaeology, it's a little bit difficult to separate biblical archaeology from all the other archaeology. In other words, you can do archaeology of a land where the Bible speaks about and a land where the Bible has no reference to. In Australia, you can study the archaeology of Australia all you want, but you're really not going to improve your understanding of the Bible per se through studying the archaeology of Australia. So at the same time, the Holy Land itself, the land of Israel, the archaeology that's practiced there should be the same kind of archaeology practiced elsewhere. So why do we call it biblical archaeology? And really the reason is because the archaeology of this place is related directly to texts we read about in the Bible. The land of Israel, the land of Canaan, the land of Egypt, Syria, Mesopotamia, Babylonia. All of these places are discussed in the biblical text, and when they are, the archaeology that's related to them kind of comes to the forefront because maybe it's going to impact our understanding of the Bible, and certainly the same is true the flip side. Our understanding of the Bible is going to help us hopefully understand what's going on in the ancient world and those parts of the ancient world where the events of the Bible take place. So biblical archaeology focuses in on the archaeology that relates to those places in the Bible. Now let's turn our attention to the apologetic value of archaeology. Well, what is apologetics? Apologetics, of course, is a defense of something. And in our case, a defense of something is a defense of the Bible itself. So, archaeological apologetics has only limited value when defending biblical truth, since even if every historical statement in the Bible could be confirmed as true, this still would not prove the theological messages contained within it. No archaeological validation can substitute for that which must be exercised by faith, such as the virgin birth of Christ or the parting of the Sea of Reeds after the Israelite exodus from Egypt. The Bible says that faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. That's from the book of Hebrews. If that's true, then my faith as a Christian should not be rooted in, it should not be connected to what we can learn about the Bible or what can confirm something in the Bible that can be discovered through archaeology. Faith has to come from within. It's from the Spirit. It's the belief within the Spirit that something that the Bible says is true is actually true. We need that faith. We need to exercise that faith. God expects it of us. In fact, the Bible says without faith, it is impossible to please God. Isn't that amazing? Without faith, it's impossible to please God. For that reason, God didn't make archaeological discovery such that it would increase or improve or give us faith. That's not the case at all. Instead, our faith stands alone based on that which is not seen. The world of archaeology, the study of archaeology and the discipline, it involves that which is seen. It scratches through the dirt to find things that can be seen and observed and studied. But that's not what our faith is all about. Instead, what we learn about God through archaeological study that affirms or confirms or works together with something in the Bible, what it does is it increases our understanding of God, and even in a greater sense, I think, our awe of God. We need to be in awe of God. Solomon said that the beginning of wisdom is the fear of God. So we ought to fear God first, and everything else starts from that. We learn other parts of wisdom after we learn the fear of God. But we can grow in our awe, in our amazement of God, by finding things in the dirt that are going to connect us with the biblical world and things we read about in the text and events that happen that seem difficult to understand, but oftentimes when we study the historical aspects of it, it becomes a lot more potent and interesting. Therefore, one must recognize the clear distinction between verifiable historical events versus non-verifiable historical events or theological proof. However, certainly archaeology can verify some historical information recorded in the Bible, and for this reason, overall, it has great apologetical value for the Christian or for the Jewish person. So there's a lot of value in helping us to defend attacks against the Bible. For example, one of the areas that's dear to my heart and is related to the first two books that I published is evidence for Israelites in Egypt for that 430-year window that the Bible says they resided there before the Exodus. Years ago, for many decades, if not a century or two, from now, going back in the past, people have looked at this episode described in the Bible and said, you know, we have no archaeological evidence that affirms the events related in the Bible about that 430-year period in Egypt demonstrate that it's true. We have no proof that this happened. And many times people will become critics as a result of the lack of evidence. And I observed this even as a PhD student at the University of Toronto. I had courses there and at other places that I've studied where professors would stand up and they would denounce the historicity of the Bible. And one of the strong arguments they used is this lack of evidence of Israelites in Egypt for 430 years. But what my research demonstrated for the first time is that we do have evidence of Israelites in Egypt. And most of this I've presented in my second book called Origins of the Hebrews, New Evidence of Israelites in Egypt from Joseph to the Exodus. And in that book, I document the four-room house, the Israelite standard form of architectural design from the period they lived in Canaan, and how that exists in Egypt. And no other ancient people had that kind of architecture. And I look at inscriptions from Middle Egyptian, and of course Middle Egyptian and Late Egyptian is the first minor of my PhD. Well, these inscriptions, hieroglyphic inscriptions, attest to Joseph, Jacob, Ephraim, and Manasseh, the two oldest sons of Joseph, and then one of Manasseh's obscure sons named Shechem, who's only mentioned in chapter 17, verse 2 of Joshua, and nowhere else in the Bible. So through being able to decipher and study these ancient inscriptions, I was able to verify how these important biblical patriarchs are attested in the historical record. So what all of this does is it affirms my awe of God. And it affirms the historical veracity of all of those events recorded in Genesis and Exodus that speak about Israelites residing in Egypt and then exiting there powerfully in the middle of the 15th century BC. All right, so the apologetic value is great, but there are some disclaimers. Several important observations help to protect the apologetic value of the historical record in the Bible, which counteract the potential objection that the number of contributions of biblical archaeology to apologetics are dwarfed by the number of historical allusions in the Bible that have not been verified by archaeology. So here are the observations. Only an exceedingly small amount of what was made and written in antiquity has survived to the present. In other words, only a small amount of the artifacts that and the objects that the people in ancient times used or handled, only a small part have survived. Anything written on papyrus faded away, so it's gone. And that's just a natural process. Their pots and pans, most of them are gone. Sometimes fragments of them remain and can be discovered and so forth, but most of them are gone. The ropes that they used for pulling things or carrying things, they're all gone because they would have disintegrated over time as an organic material. So lots of the objects are gone. So we're limited in the amount that have been preserved until our day. That's one limitation. Another limitation, only a small number of the sites that were inhabited in antiquity actually have been surveyed or even found. The Bible speaks of quite a number of cities and towns in the Bible. Well, many of them we have no idea where they are. We have no idea what the original place name was because it's not like somebody planted a sign there with the name of the site in all kinds of different ancient languages so that people in the future would know this is the certain city that, that was located here. So we're very limited in knowing where all of the biblical sites were located. Then third, probably less than 2% of the known sites have been excavated meaningfully. Archaeology is very hard work. It's extremely labor intensive. You are uncovering dirt in bucket load after bucket load after bucket load. And that takes manpower. That takes people going and usually volunteering, sometimes compensated, but usually volunteering to be able to be involved in the process of digging things up, to find things, to study them and understand them, and then have them published. And that whole process is so daunting that archaeology can't be accomplished very quickly at all. So because of that, sites take a long time to be excavated, and even when they are excavated over that long period of time, usually there's only a small percentage of the site that's actually been excavated. Most of it, they don't have time, the excavators don't have time or money to excavate. So it's not like we can learn everything we want to learn. We're just so limited with what we have. And then fourth, excavation reports have been published and made available to the scholarly world only for a portion of the sites that were excavated. So there are some sites that have been excavated to some extent or another that haven't even been reported yet. And that's one of the frustrations in the world of biblical archaeology, is that it takes the excavators so long to publish because they're constantly having to process new material that's been discovered and write it up and interact with other scholars about it and learn more about the site and the related material that's there. So that process is so intensive that it makes it a great challenge to be able to publish everything that needs to be published on a site. So all of these are limitations that prohibit us from being able to say as much about the Bible as we can. But again, big picture, we're limited in what we can study, and what we do study, only a small part of it, even if it's studied in the Holy Land, the archaeology of the Holy Land, only a small part of it actually relates to the Bible. Usually, what's studied and uncovered in excavations, even in Israel, doesn't even help us in our understanding or is not even related to something directly spoken about in the Bible. So that's really important in all of this too. So those are some disclaimers for our apologetic value that give us limitation for what we can learn. Well, now let's look at some recent discoveries that have been made in archaeology, and we'll just look at a few. We only have time for two or three. First, we'll look at an administrative building of the New Kingdom that was discovered at a site called Wadi Nasib in southwestern Sinai, or the Sinai Peninsula. Wadi Nasib is located, again, in southwestern Sinai Peninsula. So here we have the Sinai Peninsula. This is Egypt in here. And of course, the land of the Israelites eventually is here, and that's Canaan, the southern Levant. So this whole area here to the east of the Gulf of Suez and to the east of Egypt, this whole area is Sinai. And within Sinai we have sites such as Bir Nasib and Sirbit el-Khadim and Maghara. So Sirbit el-Khadim and Maghara, those are two sites where where excavations have been done and inscriptions have been found, and it was discovered that there were turquoise mines there, and the ancient Egyptians were sending expeditions down into this area to exploit the turquoise that was there. And during the lifetime of Joseph and Jacob and, Joseph and Ephraim and Manasseh, I should say, expeditions also were going down to these areas. And I try to prove in my first two books that I published that Manasseh is one of the Asiatic leaders. He's a Hebrew Asiatic leader among the Egyptians who were involved in this turquoise mining expedition as they go down into Sinai to extract turquoise, which becomes a lucrative industry. So Wadi Nasib goes along, and a wadi basically is a seasonal river. It's usually just, a ravine that's empty, and it's kind of jagged, and, it's kind of dangerous to hike or to climb around because you could easily fall and get hurt. But when rain would come, a downpour would just flood into this ravine and pour, following gravity, it would go downhill, and it would rush through this area and tear up anything in its path. But throughout most of their history, the Egyptians launched mining expeditions primarily for turquoise into southwestern Sinai. And again, Maghara and Serabit are the two sites where this usually takes place. The nearby site of Bir Nasib served as the water source for the miners during their trips to the turquoise mines. The water at Bir Nasib primarily was fed by Wadi Nasib. It's this seasonal river that didn't provide a constant flow of water. So the recent discovery is this building, and what we're seeing here, it looks like a square, but we're seeing rooms of a large administrative building that dates to Egypt's Middle Kingdom. That's the 12th dynasty. That is the lifetime of Joseph. Joseph goes down into Egypt in the 12th dynasty. He lives his life, and he dies before the end of the 12th dynasty. Right near the end of the 12th dynasty, but before its end, he dies. So this building was used during the Middle Kingdom, and that's from 2045 BC to 1805 or a little bit later BC. And it was connected to this turquoise mining industry that was going on. So undoubtedly, the administrative heads of this effort were located and working here at inside these rooms in this building. So what did they find? Well, again, this was a large administrative building excavated along the center of Wadi Nasib, and the building was the headquarters for the leaders of the mining expeditions in the Middle Kingdom. 2 floors were found, so they had a lower floor and an upper floor, and in the upper floor they found 4 copper ingots that were left behind. So copper was related to what was going on there too. 3 copper extraction caves were discovered in the vicinity of the building, one of whose rooms contained a workshop for processing turquoise. So they were extracting both copper and turquoise in this venture. So it wasn't just restricted to turquoise, but certainly these caves had relics or remnants of the work that was done there, including, in many cases, pick marks from the miners who had metal-bladed tools used to cut away at the stone, which would unlodge chunks of it. It would fall to the ground, and then they'd break it up and look for copper or turquoise, depending on what they were mining at that very place. From the time of Cyrus the Great, which is much later, that's in the 6th century BC, traces of copper smelting furnaces were found. So the whole point is, even later throughout history, after the events that are recorded in the Old Testament, still the mines here were used and the facilities were used, as well as this administrative building. So it covered the good portion of 2 millennia. Turquoise refining workshops were discovered along with stones used to weigh the turquoise. So the miners here weren't just extracting turquoise and taking chunks, complete chunks, and putting them on the backs of donkeys or whatever and hauling them back to Egypt. They were actually doing the work of refining the turquoise to be able to take it as far as they could. Mining missions included up to 1,600 men at one time. And again, at many points in history, they're doing annual expeditions to extract turquoise. But at its greatest height, 1,600 men were part of the operation, which is absolutely astounding. And this is according to inscriptions that have been discovered in the vicinity. Reference to those who provided food for the expeditionary team fits perfectly with the contributions of my own research. So what was found in this recent find here is that there was evidence of the provision of food for the expeditionary team. And this connects to one of the inscriptions that's in my first book, The World's Oldest Alphabet, Hebrew as the language of the Proto-Consonantal script, which identifies the oldest alphabetic script in the world, which has been disputed and until my book, not convincingly argued as being a certain Semitic language, but I argue convincingly and persuasively that it is Hebrew. So there's one inscription in there, it's called Sinai 377, that relates to this, what these archaeologists found about food provision for the expeditionary team. So that inscription, Sinai 377, reads, "The baker has inscribed," and then by implication, this inscription. There's no direct object there. In English, we need a direct object. You can say Johnny hit the ball, but you can't say Johnny hit and expect the listener to understand what it is that you're implying that he or she hit. So in Hebrew, though, you don't have to have a direct object, and in this case, there wasn't one offered. But what it says is that the baker inscribed implied this inscription. The baker inscribed this inscription. So what does that mean? It's basically like graffiti. If you go to a cave, right, a certain park, maybe a state park, and you go hike through the woods to get there, nobody's around, maybe you'll take some marker or some paint or something and say, Bill was here, and you'll date it. That's a kind of graffiti. And that's exactly what this is. This is an early 4-letter Hebrew piece of graffiti. The baker inscribed this inscription. And again, it's at Wadi Nasib, the water source. And he's claiming to be a baker. And think about it. What does a baker need to bake bread? Well, a baker needs grain to bake bread. A baker needs the tools, and a baker needs the bowl to put it in and so forth. And a way of baking it, and so he needs an oven or something to that effect. So those kinds of things he needs, but he also needs water. You can't bake bread without water. So the baker constantly was connected with water. So is it any surprise that a Hebrew baker would write an inscription, a 4-letter inscription, in 1840 BC with the ability to write Hebrew and the script already having been invented, sometime after 1859, at the year of Jacob's death and the year that Ephraim and Manasseh moved to where their uncles were, at some point that's when it was invented. So this baker was saying that he inscribed this inscription. So it all makes sense with the context, and this relates to the discovery of what the archaeologists found. So this administrative building along Wadi Nasib adds strong weight to the plausibility of the translation of Sinai 377 in my book, The World's Oldest Alphabet. And here is a picture of Sinai 377 actually, this one here is Sinai 377 from Wadi Nasib. This is a Middle Egyptian inscription. This is the Hebrew inscription, and you can see one letter right there. There's another letter, and there's another letter. So these are basically like sister inscriptions. They're called stelliform, and the look of an old tombstone, that's known as a stela. So if it's inscribed into a rock surface like this, where it's not a complete stela that's standing alone on its own, it's called stelliform. So this is a stelliform inscription, 1 and 2. And so I was able to decide to transcribe both of these and then to to decipher the Hebrew inscription here that consists of one word and a second word. So this is the verb for scrape or inscribe, and this is the verb for baker. So the baker inscribed this inscription. And then the final recent discovery we're going to look at is Proto-Iolic capitals that were found at a modern place in Jerusalem called Armon HaNatziv, and there's a promenade there where they discovered these ancient Aeolic capitals. So here's a picture from 2020 of two of the capitals that were discovered, and this was the unveiling. As they're dropping it down, people in the public get to see it for the first time. Obviously, with the masks on that the people have, you can see that this is kind of the heart of the COVID era in 2020. And this is a more large, blown-up view of these Proto-Iolic capitals, and you can see that they were absolutely gorgeous. So these would be placed at the top of a pillar. So you would have a stone pillar that would go all the way down to the ground, and it would be on a stone surface. And at the top, as the column rises up, you would put a capital like this to beautify the pillar. So it just doesn't stand alone with this dull-looking cylindrical shape. But the capital makes it extremely beautiful. So dozens of limestone remains from the promenade include balustrade fragments, 3 complete limestone Proto-Iolic capitals, decorative items from window frames, and other things that were discovered. So these date to what's called the First Temple period. And again, Solomon is the constructor, or his work crew. They were the ones who constructed what's called the First Temple, sometimes called the Solomonic Temple. And the beginning of the construction on the temple took place in 967 BC, and that temple stayed in existence all the way until 587 BC, at the time of the Neo-Babylonian invasion and destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. So, part of the royal or aristocratic mansion built during the restoration of Jerusalem after the Neo-Assyrian siege during the construction boom after the city became safe. No information is known as to when the IAA's excavations at this site took place, but the identity of the owner of the mansion also remains a mystery. So this was kind of done, this excavation was done a little, or these finds were made a little bit in obscurity. The style of these capitals is similar to that on the obverse of Israel's 5-shekel coin, a design intended to pay tribute to Jerusalem's First Temple period. So these capitals, these Aeolic capitals, are scaled-down versions of the giant Proto-Iolic capitals from the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. So here's the context in which one of these capitals was found. You can see the excavators there with their tools attempting to uncover one of them. So soon after their discovery, photographs were taken. You can see still probably some of the dirt that remains. So still at this point some more cleaning had to be done, and at this point now the cleaning was complete, and this is a publication photo. So this shows a number of these capitals. So, and this is a picture of a modern balustrade showing you this concept of a column and then a decorative element at the top of it with the rail that goes to connect all of them together. So that's the idea behind something like this capital. Now, these capitals can be connected to ancient architecture, notably what we know from what would have been the Davidic palace, the palace that David first built that's described in 1 Kings. And that palace is one that was used throughout the Judite monarchy. So all the way essentially until the Judites were captured by the Neo-Babylonians, it continued to be used. It was very well built. It was discovered by an Israeli archaeologist who died, I forget exactly in what year, maybe like 2020 or so, named Eilat Mazar, fantastic excavator And she is one of the few Israeli archaeologists who actually has a high view of the history that's written in the Bible itself. So this is a reconstruction of David's palace at Jerusalem based on the plan of Palace 1723 at Megiddo, which is a comparable site. So that's up in the northern Levant, the northern part of the southern Levant, I should say. And this is contemporaneous with this large stone structure at Jerusalem that was partially excavated by Eilat Mazar. So these Proto-Aeolic capitals at the entrance to the palace enclosure reflect their discovery when she found them. So where these asterisks are, this is the kind of position where you would have such Proto-Aeolic capitals. A doorway entering, monumental architecture here, a large doorway, probably thick walls, and in this doorway it was beautified with such capitals as these. So they were actually found at the site in Jerusalem where at the base of where David's palace would have stood above it. So here's actually some of the excavation work done originally by Kathleen Kenyon, and she found this Proto-Aeolic capital that, again, undoubtedly is part of the Palace of David. So she found that before Eilat Mazar ever excavated and found the remnants of the walls of David's palace. And at some point, the walls of that palace are several meters in thickness. It's absolutely a massive wall. So the finds in the recent finds in Jerusalem fit together well with finds such as these, which would have been connected with David's palace. And this is an artist's rendering of what it would have looked like for David. And again, he's as the city of David sits, it's below his palace. So he's looking down onto the city, literally from above at an angle. And of course, that makes him available to be able to see Bathsheba and what she's doing in places where she may be visible. So he's standing here, leaning up against this column, this squared column, with a Proto-Aeolic capital here. And again, this architectural design comes from the Grecians. So this is Greek in design and implemented during the lifetime of David, as we saw earlier. So those are some of the recent discoveries that we know about from archaeology that's been done in the world of the Bible, the land of Israel, and some of the places beyond, that give us excitement at all of the other things that are out there waiting to be discovered. So my hope is that maybe some of you would be interested at some point in your life in participating in such archaeological digs. All you have to do is get your way to Israel, find a dig to be connected with, whether it's a secular dig or it's a dig where believers are involved, and start excavating. It's really a lot of fun. Is it work? Yes. Usually it's in a warm season, so it's going to be hot outside. You'll be doing some sweating. You'll get dirty, but it's a thrill to discover evidence of the ancient world, especially when it relates to the Bible. So thank you for participating in Lesson 2 of our series on the basics of biblical archaeology.